So this week, so we talked about food or holidays last week. So this week we'll kind of jump back to after you got married, and then you moved to Ann Arbor to
Oh, I
finish.
thought we were going back further. I
Did
didn't.
we?
No, I thought you said something about going back to uh, like um, af- after college, but before we got married.
Well, do you have more stories for that? I mean,
No, we can go on, beyond that. But there was a time when Mom first left for school that my girlfriends and I did a lot of stuff around the city, things like that. And I had come across an article recently talking about the closure of Minsky's Burlesque.
mhm.
And my girlfriends and I had read about it at the time that they were closing in New Jersey. They had already closed or got thrown out of New York. So we went there with a whole group to see, Lily St. Cyr and, whoever else was the stars of, because we had never seen Burlesque. We wanted to see it before we left, things like that.
Yeah.
Story. And a lot of my friends were going to City College, and at the time they had a lady called Minnie. Oh, I'm trying to think of her last name. Um, but anyway, she was very famous for running the like Friday night concerts where you paid maybe a buck and you saw all sorts of stars. She would bring in people from all over the place. And it was in a stone seating, steps, stone steps, no background, no back thing to lean on. Uh, but it was very famous at the time because she would charge 50 cents or a dollar, something like that, and the kids would come, and it was just delightful. And I think she had the Prince of England at that time come visit, and she couldn't find him in the audience, and she's up there yelling, "Here, Prince, come, Prince," things like that. Um, Minnie Guggenheimer was the name.
Mm.
And she was very famous, as I say, for doing things like that. I also, because of Donna asking questions, there was a time when my sister was on a radio show. I don't know if I had spoken about that,
Mm-mm.
and she was asked to speak about a discussion about the American Indian. Well, it seems one night, according to her, I woke her up, sat her up, and held her in front of me. I sat across the legs and told her the history of every American Indian tribe in this nation. It must have been in my sleep because I have no recollection of doing that. So things like that. She did very well on the show, but I had no
Do you
idea that.
remember that you know the history of American Indians?
Oh yeah, I knew the history. I knew
Okay.
a lot of stuff. I knew everything. I was encyclopedic. As
Right.
far as that's concerned. But doing that to her, I have no recollection. I gather I grabbed her braids and held her, sitting on her, until she listened to everything I had to say. So things like that, I thought you'd be interested in. I
Mhm.
think it's in the book, but I wasn't sure. Um, and there were places that we went to. We spoke about some of the restaurants and things, but we used to go to a place dancing up in Armonk, New York, which was up in Westchester County, with some friends, and it was I think it was called the Log Cabin. It was a log cabin basically, but they had bands, old-fashioned bands where you can come and dance, and it was just something pleasant, something different. And we went with a couple of other couples, and one of them was always very cheap. Uh, they Whenever they had to pay for a round, we would share paying for a round of drinks. They never ordered that kind of fun, and
Uh-huh.
it just struck the other boys, so we spoke about that kind of thing. Um, and then the college days, I don't know if I told you about going to a fraternity party with my girlfriends.
I know the stories in the book, but
Yeah.
you can tell that one. Yeah.
Well, it was just that kind of thing that when Mom had gone off to school, I would spend more time with them. And the party we went to, we came in and within a short time, the guys came down wearing underwear, shorts, doing a dance. And we decided it was time to leave. And as we were leaving, they were throwing beer out the windows from the second floor. This was Columbia University, which we didn't have a high esteem for. But we wound up at some pizza place, a bunch of us, trying to figure out how to get the smell of beer out of this gal's boots on coat, which was a fake fur. So uh, stories like that.
Was the drinking age 21 then, or was it lower than that?
It
What
was
was
21 at that time.
really?
Yes, and strangely enough, they never really bothered us for drinking.
Hmm.
Uh,
But like some places it was like, because I know when like my parents were in college, like in I don't know if it was everywhere, but I know in Urbana and Champaign, like that, like it was like 18 in Urbana to drink beer and wine, and then 19 in Champaign, and
yeah,
like I know that there was like weird. I think the
weird
same thing.
rules.
Yeah, I think the same. I think I remember Donna saying something the same thing about New
Uh,
York or Massachusetts or something like
as
that, and
far, yeah, it varied from place to place, and sometimes localities have different rules. But I've always fought for the 18-year-old drinking age, period. And my rationale was if you're old enough to serve in the army and fight for this country, you're old enough to drink. Uh, I don't know how, rational, and old enough to vote because
right.
the vote was also
Excuse me.
21 in a lot of, most places.
Oh,
Uh,
that's right. Voting was 21 until like
yeah,
the 70s.
yeah. And that's
Yeah.
one of the things that I fought to get lowered to 18. Now they're pushing for 16, which I think is too low.
Hmm.
Uh, so, we'll see what happens. I'm no longer, out there actively fighting for all these things, but as part of the illegal women voters, it was always interesting to.
Why do you think 16 is too young?
Um, I honestly believe because I don't believe it's a legal age. And
Hmm.
if the legal age were 16, I would say yes. But the legal age was 18. And so it made sense that people at 18 should vote. I don't see the rationale for it at this point. If they
Makes
want
sense.
to lower it in, places, that's something else. But I don't think they teach enough history in schools today for a 16-year-old to be able to vote.
Yeah. I think it seems like because Jason is now obviously he's going to become a teacher, so he's been student teaching, and it seems like that's getting better. I mean, I don't know, not everywhere, but like their Illinois now requires like an actual more government and more like I don't know exactly what the wording is, but or like what the requirement is, but they have to take a government course
Good.
or civics course in order to like
Good.
yeah, and so like they learn about what we all should learn about, and so
Yeah,
that's a
history,
requirement in
yeah,
Illinois now,
was
but I don't know if it's everywhere.
a major part, but then they began to, especially in the South, seem to eliminate a lot of the history, or so people didn't know law or constitutional law or anything else.
Hmm.
I think they should also add a class. Um, I don't care where along the way, just basic living, paying bills, understanding your electric bill, understanding, various how to live. kind of
Mhm.
things as part of a history or economic course or something like that. Because there are a lot of people I know who just totally unprepared for it.
Mhm. Oh yeah, I mean, even like a basic like home ownership like would be great because
Uh,
like
yeah,
I don't I mean like I knew and thankfully like I have my dad I can just call, but like and I'm not like I know enough about things to like get by, but like there's so much that you're just like I don't really you like learn by fire and that's not always good. So like, if I knew, like, basic although I don't know, that might be dangerous too. If I knew, like, basic electrical or plumbing, like, I might get myself in more trouble than eh
um,
or maybe not. No, I actually would
yeah,
it'd actually probably be good because like, there's been times where, like, my furnace has gone out, and if I just knew what it looked like, what I was looking at, like, maybe like, some of the calls like, one of the calls, it was just too dirty, and so it was, like, causing one of the lights to, like, malfunction. So basically the guy just cleaned it out and that was it. So
yeah.
I
Sometimes
don't know.
the simplest things that we just don't know.
Yeah. Right.
Yes. No,
Or
I agree.
cars. Yeah,
Yeah,
cars too. Yeah.
yeah, there should be a course in basic living, and I think that should be part of a high school course.
Mhm.
Um, when I spoke about doing like a cooking class, uh, the boys had shop
Mhm.
that was required to take. So my only problem is I think both should have been taught for the boys and the girls. The whole
Yeah.
thing.
Well, we did when I was in junior high. We had um there were like the four uh I don't know what do you call them, but it was music, art, home ec, and
Yeah,
then industrial arts, or which became industrial technology because obviously when I was growing up there and now there's a lot more technology involved with it too. So it was basically like shop meets like we did like CAD programming and things like that. So there was some woodworking, but then there was also computer technology too. And so junior or sixth grade and seventh grade, you did one each quarter. And then in eighth grade, you got to pick one semester. You got to pick two to do one each semester. So I did art and industrial technology because that was fun. You're wood like making stuff. I made a cabinet, American Girl doll clothing cabinet, and I gave it to Gabby. That was what I made for eighth grade, and it was awesome. So yeah, I think everybody should do all that sort of stuff.
okay. Well, as a young mother, and as you get involved with the schools and things, as you will,
Yeah,
uh, push it.
yeah, I will. I don't know. I'm not as familiar with the school districts that Addie's in right now, so we'll see what they currently have and or I can.
When we moved up to Rockland County, and I suddenly found myself getting involved in things. I wanted. Uh, I don't know how to describe it. I wanted to see things change in many areas. So the league and a lot of the people that I met from there were involved in everything from the PTA to the Friends of the Library to all sorts of other things. Um, the temple that we belonged to very much wanted me on their board, and I promised them I would donate my time to do some of their PR stuff, but I didn't have the time to join them and be on the board. The woman who was president at the time, I think, saw me as an ultimate president, and that's not where I wanted to go. So I had to limit my time.
Yeah, I mean, you had three kids, League of Women Voters, like got a lot of going on.
No, it was enough. Yeah, appearing on radio because they didn't have the TV shows in those days, and come election time with the ballot issues. Uh, One woman called me. She had five-minute shows to deal with the 12 ballot issues or 15 ballot issues, whatever it was. I wanted to ask me questions immediately. I said, "Tell me what you want. Give me the time slot. and call me back tomorrow. I will give you the questions to ask me for each day, and I'll time it so that you get 5 5-minute shows." And she said, "Oh, thank you." And she called me back, and I gave her the questions that she wanted answered in a format that she could use. And in those days, appearing on radio answering call-in questions was interesting. Always trying to explain to people. And I was the shy one growing up. Now I'm no more as approaching every subject with an open mouth, not an open mind. So
Yeah.
anyway, what else?
So, do you have any other stories that you want to share from your college days?
The college days, no, I told you there were just a few like the city college kind of things, and I was also talking. You had asked a question about cursing last time.
Hmm.
I'll
Yeah.
get back to that in just a minute because when I was talking to Paul, I said, "Do you recall my saying anything to you about cursing?" He
Hmm.
said, "Well," he said, "Yes." He said, "You always said be creative. Stop using the same damn terms everybody else does." And he said, "One of the things you said was, may the fleas of 1,000 camels nest in your armpits." Oh, I wanted to share that with you.
That's a good one. Yeah, I asked my dad about it, and he's like, "No, I don't ever remember her saying anything about it."
I do recall, once he said that, because again, the Jewish history uh, and humor, there were always a bunch of, curses like that kind of thing. And you were talking about that the other day, and it dawned on me that's a good one you should know about. So,
I like that one. Yeah.
yeah, one of these days I will um, try and get together some others for you. I'll send them to you. I don't remember what book it's in, but I have several books on both Jewish humor, and history. So, and I've always enjoyed them. I've always appreciated the tradition.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. So, so you guys got married, and then you moved to Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
So what was life like living there as a student's wife? Because I know this is like post World War II, so there are, like as you mentioned, there were a lot of students who were married. So there wasn't, because of the
It was
GI
just
Bill and stuff like that.
it was just beginning at that time, and they were just beginning to think of putting married students housing on campus. They were building a whole new campus at that time. So, as I remember, Marv, as part of the architectural group, students would go out and do surveying of the new campus. So it was very early on, but there was I think I may have mentioned, there was a architectural professor's wife who started a Wives of Architectural Students group, and we would meet in her house once a month or something like that.
How many of
And,
there were you?
hmm?
How many of there were you?
There was probably about 20 in the group that I can recall, and she would have things like entertainment, one piano, and talk about art, architecture, things like that, so you would be familiar with what your husband or whatever was doing. I was working at the time at the first year at the medical school, the pathology department, typing pathological diagnoses. And it was it was interesting, and I had some friends there that I used to hang out with, in addition to Maud's group. And if we have a party in our place, which was small, it was a one bedroom type of thing on the second, like a 2-story house. it was like half. We had a bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, little dining room, and long, narrow living room. Um, and having a party there. One day, Mom found me sitting under the table in the dining room because the place was packed with people. He says, "What are you doing under there?" I said, "I wanted to sit down. There was no other place." Um, it was silly, but we had a lot of fun. Um, we would get together with, there were several couples that we knew. One was from Europe, and they would talk about growing up. I think they were from Switzerland, and talking about having taken somebody's one of the farmer's carts apart and putting it together on top of his barn, things like that. And Bob was relating a story that at the fraternity house they did that for somebody's car, a Volkswagen. They put it in his room. So uh, those are the kinds of stories you want to hear.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Well, that's what we did. I remember the parties that we were invited to, and one place we went to, uh, they literally had bathtub gin. There was a bathtub full of it. And I said, come on in and help yourself. We thanked them and we said we were just looking for somebody and we, catch up with them later and left. But yes, there are all sorts of,
You didn't try the bathtub gin?
no, no, I was very particular on what I drank. I'm a New Yorker, remember?
Right, yes, yes.
So no, that wasn't my thing. But the fact that they had it amazed me.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that's very interesting.
It was sort of on the like one of the outsides of town, not like the center of town. And I told Mom I wasn't comfortable there at all. So yes, those are the kinds of parties. And as I said, I think I had mentioned to you that I had a girlfriend whose husband was a dean, and she was an ex-Marine Corps sergeant,
Yeah,
and we were buddies, and we used to go to the movies and other things together. I worked with her at the medical school, so it's always some interesting stories. And I'm trying to think of who else out there. The place we lived in, I do have to tell you, the apartment we rented, we had heard from our neighbors downstairs, it was a young couple with a baby, that they had mice. And I said we'd be on the lookout for it. She says she's spoken to the landlord who had a real estate office down below us. And they denied any mice in their, unit in this building. Absolutely not. So I, one night in the kitchen, I thought I saw something. And I said to Mom, what do we do? He said, catch it. So I set up a bowl with like a little aspirin bottle with a string and a piece of cheese underneath. Mouse went in. I pulled the string and we had the mouse sit there all night. He got it into a paper bag and we went downstairs to talk to the landlord. And the landlord, of course, said there were no mice and blah, blah, blah. Mom opened the bag, dumped it on her desk, and the mouse went running across. And they had exterminated there immediately.
it's definitely one way to get rid of mice in your apartment.
So were we creative in complaining? Yes. And we had fun doing
Sounds like it.
it. I don't know how to describe, life there. It was a little bit different for us. Saturday mornings we would go into, or Sunday mornings, I think, we one of the weekends we would go into Detroit for bagels and maybe the New York Times or something like that, you know. So it was fun. And then when I got pregnant with your father, and wanted to travel home for the holidays, the professor who ran the um, pathology department, who was a man in his 80s at that time, and was a mustard gas poisoning expert from World War One.
Wow.
And he was also the editor of the Journal of Pathology. So it was an interesting, you know, mix of knowledge that he had. One of his sons was involved in the polio vaccine uh, development, not the first one, but the second one.
Mm.
So it was always interesting to talk to him. But he was very concerned that I would be flying home because I shouldn't be flying if I was pregnant. And I told him planes have changed and they are pressurized and it will be safe.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't drive though. I mean, shouldn't fly. I should drive or take the train. I flew. So if there's anything wrong with your father, you know why.
That explains everything now.
You know the story of my going out there with him. I flew out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, after I had my 6-week checkup or whatever. And at the same time, your grandfather was having a custom made fishing pole made by Uncle Charlie's brother. And I was to bring it, and I arrived. He comes up the stairs. They allowed him up on the plane to help me carrying the baby and the fishing pole. And what did he take? The fishing pole. So you can see where priorities were.
Right. Yeah.
We also rented a house that year
Mm-hmm.
outside of town in a place called Whitmore Lake. And the house was right on the lake. And it was a very nice place. It was basically a summer cottage for a family who lived there year round. And they only used it in the summer. They rented out to students in the during season.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a washing machine down the basement, but the whole house was up on the second floor. The basement was above ground. I mean, it wasn't, you know. So we could watch the skating, sail skating, you know, the boats. We could watch them digging holes and fishing out on the lake. It was not something I particularly wanted to do. And the interesting part is that when your father began to crawl, I hadn't gotten a playpen yet for him, but the rug was very rough, and I would put a blanket on the floor, and he would stay on that blanket because as soon as he touched the rough rug, he didn't want any part of it. So that kept him for a little while until I finally had to go out and get a playpen. But traveling to New York for the holidays with him was always interesting too. And we take the crib apart and put it in the back seat with the mattress on top and feed him as we were driving into New York. He would fall asleep and he'd wake up as we were crossing the George Washington Bridge for his morning bottle. So those were interesting trips too.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that you just put a mattress down in the back seat and just let him sleep there. Like,
without any, you know, seat belts or safety, but nothing like that existed in those days or
yeah,
even thought about.
yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, now, like, Illinois requires kids to be rear facing until they're 2,
Yeah,
because their necks are not fully developed until
yeah,
they're 2 to be able to turn around. And yeah, I mean, Addie will be in a car seat until she's like a teenager, basically, because like her car seat now will last her until she's like 5 or 6, and then she'll go to a booster seat after that. So yeah, I mean, like, like even in my lifetime, the like evolution of car seats has, you know, drastically changed. But like,
Well, the whole driving thing has. Yes. So
mhm.
I hadn't driven until we moved out to Whitmore Lake. I never went for a license. Bob took me to the sheriff's department, the county, Washington County, and he said, I'll go, find out about making an appointment for you. He comes out with the sheriff, who drove me around the block, let me drive around the block, and gave me a license. And Mark said he watched me jerking, around. I said I was nervous, very nervous about it. But the sheriff felt that I knew what I was doing, and it was just a matter of time and confidence. And with the little one that I had, I was going to be a careful driver. Now, at the time, there were no speed limits on the roads then.
Oh wow.
So, doing 60 or something that we do today, 60, 70 miles an hour, nothing. You'd be passed like you were standing still.
Wow.
Interesting times, yes.
Yeah. Well, and that's why we now have speed limits and
Yeah.
car seats and, seat belts and all of that, because that didn't always end well. So, but yeah. So one of the things I wanted to kind of, because I was reading back over kind of some of the chapters too, and like the like cost of things, like you talked about how much you paid for each one of your kids when you were staying in the hospital, and just like made my heart hurt. Just like for all three of your kids, you paid like a quarter of what I paid to have Addie, and
Yeah.
just the inflation and the like. But that was what I paid. Like I paid $2,000 for mine and Addie's hospital stay, and that was 4 days in the hospital, and I had a C-section. But that was what we paid for the copay for my insurance. The actual bill was like $20,000, and I thankfully only had to pay 2,000, and that didn't include all of like the like ultrasounds and like any of the visits I had beforehand.
Yes.
So you paid like $160 for
something like that. Yes, the prices were ridiculous. It struck me, and that's why I had written about it, because it amazed me how things have changed.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you kind of about like your like having kids and pregnancy and stuff like that, because like women's health history is like something that really interests me, and I took a whole class on that in college too. And just like the evolution of like motherhood over time is something that's really fascinating to me. So I guess the first question would be, did you know that you wanted to have 3 kids? Did you always want to be a mother? Like did you ever think about how many kids you wanted to have?
Yes, I did want to have children, and I wanted approximately 3. I did have a miscarriage in between Paul and Stacy,
Mm-hmm.
so it worked out, and I wanted my kids before I was 30. And
Did you have any particular reason, or you just were like, that sounds like a good idea?
no, I just felt I wanted them early, so that I would have a life afterward. I had It goes back to working, at the medical school. There was one doctor in one town who was constantly performing, oh gosh, what do you call it when you remove the ovaries
Oh, hysterectomies?
Hysterectomies, constantly
Uh-huh.
hysterectomies, and always the tissues were clear. There was no reason for a woman to have a hysterectomy. And when I asked the gal who was the secretary to Dr. Weller, why doesn't anybody question that? And she said, nothing I can talk about. Well, I suddenly realized that the problem is you could not get birth control in those days. And these women were subject to their husband's will
Mhm.
who they didn't use birth control. And the only way they could stop having kids is to have the parts taken out that carry them.
Right.
It was as simple as that. And it just amazed me that, again, women's rights. Uh, uh, you couldn't get, uh, yeah, how do you stop a husband when the law is on his side, kind of thing. And the attitude is still there today in a lot of places.
Right. Yeah.
It's what got me involved in the whole League of Women Voters and other things like that. When I began to realize, the world has not changed and needs to.
Mhm.
So I became an advocate of women's rights, the right to abortion as well. And I still get uh, people who are so against abortion and don't realize the impact that it has on women.
Right.
I had said to somebody, some woman that I'm online with, that I knew a woman who lost her only daughter to a back alley abortionist who left it to die in the street.
Yeah.
And she said, well, she deserved it. I said, you're pro-life? It's that kind of thing. But that's the attitude.
Right. Yeah.
They feel
Yeah.
it's such a moral issue and don't understand their own immorality in having that.
Yeah.
And when does life begin? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's
What about the life that's already existing? So,
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
So
No, I
yeah,
mean, I've seen like lots of things about that with like the fact that um it's not pro-life, it's pro-birth, because if they were truly pro-life, they would be more pushing for better sex education in schools and more birth
absolutely.
control, access to birth control
Right.
and education, because when you have those things, a comprehensive sexual education, the rates of abortion go down.
Absolutely.
And so outlawing it doesn't cause them to go down, it causes them to go up.
Absolutely. Planned Parenthood and that whole thing. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, this is part of the problem I've had with, and it's to a large degree it was the Catholic education, and I had pointed out to her. I said, I don't know if you know your Catholic history, but abortion was not illegal with the early church. It only became illegal when they ran out of people for the Crusades, and they had a children's crusade in which most of them died crossing the Mediterranean. I said, and suddenly they needed more kids, they needed more people, and so abortion became illegal. I said, to me, that was hypocritical because it's just they needed more cannon fodder.
Right. Yeah.
So, yes, you want me to get started on the political thing there? Uh, uh, and they don't know, they really don't know their history.
Right.
And that's the problem to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think somebody had asked me if becoming a mother may had changed my viewpoint on it at all, and I was like, absolutely not. It just reaffirmed the fact that I chose to be a mother and I had that option. But when I didn't want to be a mother, I had the option to not be a mother. And
Absolutely.
so, and then if I don't want any more other kids, then I don't ever have to have kids, and it's always my choice. And so that
Yeah.
just continued
Yeah.
my it just reaffirmed everything that I already believed. So
I agree. I totally agree. So, yeah.
yeah. So so you had 3 kids. So what were your pregnancies like? Were they easy? Was it like difficult? Like, I mean, you worked through at least your first one, right? So
Yeah. I had a morning nausea. Other than that, no problem. But no, it was, just just there.
yeah,
I probably, wouldn't go walking around in a bathing suit or play baseball, but uh, that kind of thing. But other than that, yeah, uh,
Pretty straightforward.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just part of life.
Mhm.
Um, I was able to do, whatever I was doing, and I didn't really suffer any unusual discomfort. Let's put it that way. So, and I had a doctor who, except for space with your father and your uncle, did a caudal injection around the spinal area at the base of the spine, injecting it to numb it so that when you gave birth, you could be awake and see what's happening, but not feel the
Yeah.
pain.
So like kind of like a epidural.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah. So were twilight births like that was still a thing, right? Or was it when you were having kids?
I don't
Or
know
were
what
those
they were using at the time, but this is what this particular doctor, did until we went in with space, and it seemed to take forever. And I was out. It was the only one that I was out for because everything was happening so slowly, and then when it happened so quickly. So she's the only one I didn't see being born. When Paul was born, I remember them discussing, what time was he born? I said it was 1 a.m. on the dot, because I was watching the clock and complaining that I can't see what's happening. He says, "Well, you should have told me. I would have set up a mirror." So yeah, it was, as I say, part of life.
right.
We
Yeah.
had
So
a
was
doctor to begin
Mhm.
with, obstetrician, who was in his 80s at that time. Uh, he actually, when we moved up to Pearl River, two of the people, two sisters, he delivered. He was part of that family, which is an interesting, kind of thing that occurred, that we met the people who knew him,
yeah.
uh, living in, New York City, and then moving to Rockland County out of the city. Uh, and actually, he was a cousin of theirs, of their mother's.
Hmm.
And he was very famous, in their family, and his reputation was excellent. But he also traveled with one of the movie producers around the world, and he had books on horses in his office, which which worried me. Uh, but he studied them for because they used to bet on horses all over the world.
Interesting.
Yes, he was an interesting man.
And so did he delivered my dad and Uncle Paul, did he deliver Aunt Stacy too?
Yeah.
Okay, so he delivered all three of them.
Yes, I went into the city, to see him. Yes, I think Toots Thelma,
Hmm.
was the one who had recommended him. I think she used him.
Hmm.
I don't think he liked her as much, but he would interview people to whether or not to accept them as patients.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, so it was that kind of thing. He liked us.
That's good. That's good.
He thought it a little strange that we were going to be out at school and then come home for the delivery. So it worked out fine. Even when we lived in the suburbs, driving in, to me, it was like a 20-minute ride if I was driving. But Marv said it was actually closer to 30 to 40 minutes. So,
So what were what did you like what would like a typical like pregnancy checkups be like during yeah, I guess what would be your checkups be like? How often do you remember how often you would go or like during the course of the pregnancy?
Generally, I don't think it was. I'd probably speak to him more than I'd see him. Toward the end, he would check maybe monthly or that kind of thing. I really don't recall because we were away, as I say, the first one.
Right.
And it wasn't until we got into the city that I went in. He, checked me over and said everything was, looking good, and make an appointment for whenever. Uh, he had an office on Central Park West, um, which was an interesting area, uh, very exclusive.
Mm.
Um, I was talking to somebody about that, and he had been there for many years, so good reputation. But as a character,
Yeah, it sounds like it. Well, it sounds like you were a good match. So
it worked out.
yeah.
When I had a miscarriage in between,
Hmm.
we had been to Vegas, and I came home, and suddenly I didn't even know I was pregnant. But suddenly I started bleeding, and they took me to the local hospital, and they were doing nothing for me. And I told Mark to call Hornstein and get me into the city. And that's what we did the next morning. He came to the hospital, picked me up, and took me down there. And he did a GNC. And he said it was an ectopic pregnancy in an unusual place inside not in the uterus, but in the canal.
Mm.
And cleaned it out. And he said, "You'll be fine, no problem." And that's when Stace was born, and 2.5 years after that. But I asked him afterward when we went to the office, "How much do I owe you?" He said, "Come over here." He says, "Give me a kiss there." I kissed him on the cheek. He gave me a hug. He says, "You're paid in full." I mean, that's the kind of a man he was.
Because you were entertaining them, right? That was why.
That's what I was going to say. And I
Yeah.
asked him why. And he said, "Because you were very funny. You entertained us during the whole procedure." He would not tell me what I said, so I had no idea whether I spoke about uh, like Buddy Hackett's routine in Vegas that night that I had seen before we left, or other things that may have occurred that always I have a strange mind, as you know. So what I told him, I don't know, but he said I kept them in stitches, and, and it was paid.
That's awesome. It's good. You got your humor paid for something.
Anything else that you wanted to know about?
Well, I think you mentioned when I was reading back over that the was it the first hospital wanted to give you a blood transfusion or something,
Uh,
and you're like, I don't know about that.
the man who was on duty was somebody I knew from the temple. He was a doctor who uh, I think had shown up once when we had called him when one of the kids was sick and forgot his medical bag. That kind, he was not the brightest person. I did not want him touching me.
Right.
So when I had gone into the hospital and found out he was the attending physician, I wanted out of there. I didn't want them to do anything. They wanted to give me a blood transfusion to start with, and I wouldn't let them. I said, "You go back and make sure it's not for somebody else." Because I don't recall them ever taking a blood sample or anything else and knowing my blood type.
Mm. Yeah.
So I really didn't trust what was happening.
Right. Yeah.
So
What is your blood type? Are you a negative or are
I have no
you
idea at this
you don't
point. I
know?
had it to be positive or something like that. But
Yeah.
my father was a type O who was a universal donor. And so he used to donate gallons of blood, literally,
Yeah.
over the years. I didn't, still don't, because some of the medication I take, it's makes it unacceptable. So
Yeah. No, I'm B negative. And so is Donna, and so is Gabby and Lexi. So it's an interesting, which like it doesn't matter until you have a baby, because the RH negative RH factor can
yeah, I
cause
don't think
serious
it's
complications. But
unusual. Yeah,
so, but yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to me, the blood typing, whatever. But yeah, no, I've given blood before, and I don't know. They don't really need my blood as much as they do other people, so it's not been something I've kept up with. But anyways, what else was I going to ask about? Oh, wait, the other thing. So once you had my dad, you mentioned that you're feeding him Similac, and then your doctor, your pediatrician, back in
and then
yeah,
yeah,
the like
what
the way
happened
you're
when we
feeding
went
him.
to
Yeah.
Ann Arbor, yeah, I was looking for a pediatrician out there, and I couldn't get an appointment for like 6 months or something with some of them because they were jammed up. So I went back to Dr. Weller from where I had worked at the pathology department, and he says, I've got somebody for you. He says, just tell him I sent you, I'll give him a call, and he'll take you. And when I got there, he was, uh, had very modernistic paintings in his office. The office was dark. I expected him with his dark glasses. He looked like a druggie, but he had an excellent reputation. And he had said to me, what are you feeding him? And I was looking for a change in formula because it didn't seem to be satisfying. And I told him Similac. He says, I wouldn't feed that to my dog. Similac was something that the doctor I had worked for had recommended when we were in New York at the time. So obviously he didn't agree with her. And then we had some other, formulas to start with, and then switch to the Similac. And then when we went out there, I took him to like the Well Baby Clinic or something before I could get an appointment with a doctor. Uh, and it wasn't enough for him, and that's what I wanted to get changed. So it took me like a couple of weeks to get through to somebody to get an appointment. So yes,
So then you found it was like a Caro syrup and something mixture or something like that? Like what did you end up switching to?
I'm sorry. The what?
What was the mixture that you ended up switching to? Like from the Similac to like what did you end up feeding him?
Uh, Basically a formula that had Caro syrup.
Hmm.
It was the old-fashioned style of formula: condensed milk and a little Caro syrup.
Hmm.
And it amazed me because I hadn't heard of that being used currently at that time. And I said, that's the old fashioned way. He says, it's the best way.
Hmm.
So,
Interesting.
and it satisfied your brother, and I didn't have a problem after that.
Right. So was like breastfeeding not a thing at the time, or did you just
It
decide
was,
not to
but
do
I
it?
didn't want to get tied down with it. So,
I mean, makes sense. It takes a lot of time. So
yes, and I didn't want to get started on that. So, uh, I don't think it hurt him any. He grew up all right.
yeah.
So, uh, yeah, I'm trying to think of what else at that particular time with that, but no, it was no, that was about it with the stuff in Michigan, and then coming back, I went back to the pediatrician I had worked for, and we had no problem with that. As long as I had somebody I could, talk to if there were a problem.
Hmm.
I had started to use somebody out of the city when they got older, locally, our community, and disagreed with their child rearing theories and left them.
Like what? Do you remember what you
Yeah, why
disagreed
do
about?
I ask my kids, uh, won't you do that? Or why do whatever it was in the form of a question rather than a demand or a command. And I said it's the same courtesy I would offer anybody. I don't think children should be dictated to in that sense. I want them to learn to make decisions. Well, I disagreed with their philosophy, and I said, well, screw that. I'll find somebody else.
Yeah. I've actually heard about that. Like it's better to be direct than like asking a question because they'll just say no. But no, I mean I see the merits on both ways. Like you should extend the same courtesy to your children that you do to other people. And
I've seen kids hit a raised both ways, and I think in the end it doesn't really matter. So
yeah.
I don't want to change my lifestyle to fit somebody else's theory. And if I want them to make choices, I would ask questions and let them learn to think and decide.
Hmm.
So that was my feeling.
Yeah.
Always opinionated.
Yes.
Anything else
I
in regard to that?
was like you talked about like some of the things that each kid did that you remember as children. Like my dad, uh his weird crawl and
Oh, when he first
uh
started to crawl, yes,
yeah.
he didn't. He basically rocked and lunged forward, which I found fascinating. So we got him, out of the out of the crib. Uh, Ultimately, he began to learn to use, move his feet, even on his knees. But the first instinct was, as I say, to just rock, and throw himself forward. And I had never seen that happen with anybody else.
Hey, problem solving, right? Gotta get
I thought it was fascinating.
yeah. And then you mentioned something with Uncle Paul and his bottles that
Uh,
like,
Other than the fact that he, would basically twirl them around, would hold them by the nipple, twirl them around, and flip them. And sometimes he's still holding the nipple, and things would spill all over the place. Yeah, he had his own way, also.
yeah. And then what about Aunt Stacy? What did she do that
I don't recall her specifically doing anything different than either one of them when they were, the boys, I think, resented the fact that when she was born, I gave her the bigger room and moved the two of them into the smaller bedroom. Uh, but I felt that a lot of the toys that she played with, rather than bring everything downstairs, it would be better in that room for her to, make a mess there.
mhm.
So it was that kind of thing. And they were, until Marv moved, separated in our family room, a space for himself and his desk, and we gave your father one of the room downstairs because he was old enough by that time, and so each had their own room. They actually had the four bedrooms, but one was used as an office downstairs.
Mm.
So they ultimately all had their own space.
Yeah. So what was it like? I think you mentioned something like so like my dad and Uncle Paul are like 2.5 years apart. So like what was that like bringing Uncle Paul home? How was my dad with that transition?
I think he was, accepting of it, just or oblivious to it. I think more. He still did his, his things. We still did things together with him. Uh, his father would take him places, and there was no problem. And then when we moved up to Rockland County to the house just before he started school. So before that, it was, either spending time with me or his grandmother, my mother, uh,
Hmm.
Minnie occasionally, but most often she was working at the store. So yeah, just a normal upbringing. There were other people that we knew who had kids for your father to play with when we moved into the apartment and uh, down the block further down from where my mother lived. One of the women, actually, the three apartments together. It was interesting. In between um, Peggy and us was another couple, and he was somebody who, when I was a kid and I played ball with the boys in the street,
Hmm.
and became their first baseman. He was the first baseman that I ousted because I was. He was a boxer and always sounded punch drunk to me. Uh, Peggy's father uh, was. They lived in our building also. It was a courtyard with three entrances. Um, they were on the first floor opposite us, in a sense. They, she had a couple of sisters, and her father was a police sergeant.
Hmm.
Above them was the restaurateur from Italy, and above them was the fireman. And I don't remember who was above that. But we knew each other, but we weren't friendly because they went to Sacred Heart and we went to the public schools. So
Hmm.
we didn't really get to know each other until we moved in there. And then we had a lot of fun. One Christmas Eve, for example, we had one of those pistols that shot those little pellets. So we
Hmm.
were aiming at uh, some of the decorations on the Christmas tree after the kids went to sleep. We would leave the door open, between, and we would, get together. So, and the boys would play, during the day. Johnny, I think it was his name. So he had a friend right there, and we go up to my mother's. Her parents lived there too, so so yeah. And up in Rockland, there were a lot of kids on the street that he got to know. I
Hmm.
think Mark took him out to introduce him to some of the kids who were in the neighborhood, and I think that was the last we saw him. So they kept busy. We lived in it was like a U shape. We were down at the end of the cul-de-sac there, at the end of and all around us were uh, other kids. I think there were about four or five about his age that they hung out together all through high school, etc. Oh yeah,
Oh.
I don't know what else to tell you about that. I don't know what specifics you want to know.
No, I think that's good. I think we're at like 3:10 right now. So we can kind of wrap it up there and then we can talk about living in Pearl River next week then.
Okay.
So talk about yeah, talk about life in Rockland
Life,
County.
life in Rockland County.
Yeah.
I told you that I had put together one of the Jewish humor things.
Hmm.
Yeah, we can talk about life in Rockland County.